I was leaning against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new condo, the late afternoon sun casting golden streaks across the polished hardwood. My silk blouse clung softly to my skin, the delicate fabric cool under my fingers as I scrolled through emails, ignoring the hum of the city below. Everything in this space felt like quiet victory, my artwork carefully chosen, a vase of fresh lilies on the counter, and the faint scent of espresso lingering in the air. Then my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't wanted to see for years flashed on the screen. Ethan. My heart sank, even though I'd spent so long convincing myself it wouldn't. For words in his message made the room suddenly smaller. You bought a condo. Why not pay my bills? I stared at the screen, breathing in slowly, letting the irony hit me. This was the same brother who had shrugged off my struggles, who had laughed when I said I couldn't cover his family's rent last year. And now, he was asking me to do it again, expecting my generosity to come with no boundaries. I traced the rim of my coffee mug, feeling the warmth seep into my hands, and I realized something I hadn't admitted in years. I wasn't that scared, desperate girl anymore. I had earned this life. Every late night, every small sacrifice, every quiet step toward independence. And for the first time, I understood that this moment, this message, wasn't just a trigger. It was a reckoning. Years earlier, I was living in a cramped apartment, the kind where the peeling wallpaper seemed to echo the chaos of my life. I was 24, freshly out of college, juggling 3 part-time jobs just to make rent, and trying to help my family as best I could. Ethan had called one evening, his voice sharp with entitlement. Seriously, Sarah, he said, you bought a condo, but you won't cover our bills? You're my sister. Family helps family, right? I remember the lump rising in my throat, the bitter taste of frustration mixing with guilt. My hands shook as I gripped the phone, nails chipped from weeks of exhaustion. I wanted to scream, to make him see, but I only whispered, I can barely pay my own bills. It wasn't the first time he dismissed my boundaries. Each request, each expectation, chipped away at me until I felt invisible in my own family. I loved them. I still do, but I realized then that love alone couldn't save me from being drained, overlooked, and undervalued. That night, I held my grandmother's locket, a simple gold piece she had given me when I graduated. She had always believed in me, even when the world didn't. Her words echoed in my ears. Your generosity is a gift, Sarah, not a chain. Protect it and protect yourself. I could feel the weight of those words as I made a decision that would change everything. I would still care for my family, but I would no longer let them dictate the terms of my life. I started looking for ways to stand on my own, to create a life that belonged solely to me. I took the locket in my hand, pressing it against my chest, and whispered to myself, I can do this. I will do this. That night, I began applying for jobs beyond the small town I'd always known, sending resumes into the unknown, determined to claim a space in the world that was mine and mine alone. It was terrifying. I cried more than I'd care to admit. I felt lonely, exhausted, and unsure if I had what it took. But deep down, beneath the fear, a tiny spark of hope flickered, and with it, the first glimmer of a life I could build for myself, away from obligation and judgment. The first few months after I decided to stand on my own were the hardest. I moved to a small studio in the city, the kind of place where the pipes groaned at night and the neighbors' arguments drifted through thin walls. Every morning, I brewed coffee in a chipped mug and stared at the peeling paint, wondering if I was making a colossal mistake. But then I reminded myself of the locket on my neck, my grandmother's voice whispering, protect your gift, protect yourself. I found a mentor early on, a seasoned marketing executive named Claire. She saw something in me that I hadn't fully recognized myself, determination mixed with creativity, a spark that refused to be dimmed. You're going to make mistakes, she told me during our first meeting, but don't let fear stop you. Some people get lucky. You, Sarah, are going to work for it. Her words were simple, but they ignited something I hadn't felt in a long time, belief. The nights were long, the work relentless. I juggled contracts, pitched ideas, and fought self-doubt daily. There were moments I wanted to quit, like the night I stayed at the office until 2 a.m., my laptop screen blurring into exhaustion, and tears pricked my eyes as I wondered if I had enough grit to keep going. But each time I faltered, I reminded myself of why I started: freedom, independence, and a life that was mine to shape. Small victories began to add up. My first major client paid in full, a sum that felt like wind beneath my wings. The next month, a collaboration with a well-known brand boosted my confidence further. I celebrated quietly, never posting it on social media, never telling my family. They thought I was still struggling, still trapped in the endless cycle of family obligations. That secrecy became a shield, allowing me to grow without judgment or interference. I learned to savor the little things that symbolized progress: the first paycheck I deposited into my savings account, the hum of my new computer during late-night brainstorming sessions, the way sunlight spilled across my apartment as I sketched out future plans. Slowly, the city began to feel like home, my small studio transforming into a space that reflected my ambition, my taste, and my newfound independence. By the end of that first year, I had saved enough for a down payment on my condo, a place I could call my own, a tangible representation of every sacrifice, every tear, and every sleepless night. I had built a life that my past self could only dream of, a life that whispered, quietly but confidently, "I am enough. I am capable. I am unstoppable." And yet, the thought of my family's reactions lingered at the back of my mind. One day, Ethan would realize that the sister he underestimated had outgrown the boundaries he tried to impose. One day, they would see the woman I had become and the power of a life built on courage, resilience, and self-respect. The knock at my condo door came at an unexpected hour, mid-afternoon on a quiet Tuesday. I wasn't expecting anyone, and yet, instinctively, I knew the voice on the other side before I even opened it. "Sarah? It's me." "Ethan." His tone carried the same arrogance I remembered, but now it sounded slightly uncertain, hesitant. I let him in, and as he stepped into my living room, I held back a small, private smile. The space was immaculately arranged, a reflection of the life I had painstakingly built. Abstract paintings lined the walls, my grandmother's locket glinting softly on the mantel, and sunlight pooled across the polished oak floors. Each detail was intentional, a quiet declaration of independence. Ethan's eyes widened. His gaze darted around, lingering on the art, the furniture, the subtle luxury of my surroundings. He tried to mask it, but I could see the disbelief flickering in his expression. "Wow, this is," he stammered, searching for words. I gestured toward the sofa, keeping my voice calm, deliberate. "Sit. I think it's time we had a proper conversation." The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same brother who had demanded I cover his bills, laughed when I said I couldn't, and never once considered my limits. And now, here he was, face to face with a woman he barely recognized, in a life he hadn't imagined. I poured 2 cups of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, and set one in front of him. I let him take it in, the paintings, the furniture, the subtle symbols of my journey, before I spoke. "I know what you're thinking," I said, letting the pause hang just long enough to draw him in. "You think I'm struggling, still the girl who couldn't afford rent, the one you tried to take advantage of. But I'm not her anymore." Ethan's jaw tightened, and I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. I continued, my voice firm but controlled, layered with years of restraint and quiet triumph. "I own this condo. I built my business from the ground up. I make my own money, I make my own rules, and I've learned something important. Generosity is only powerful when it comes from a place of strength, not obligation." His disbelief was palpable. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to process the reality in front of him. "Wait, you own this? You built all of this?" "Yes," I said simply, letting the words settle. "Every late night, every sacrifice, every doubt and fear. You weren't there, but I was. And now you see me. Not the struggling girl you tried to exploit, but the woman I've fought to become." I watched as his shoulders slumped, a combination of guilt and awe washing over him. He looked at me with a kind of reverent shock, and I allowed myself a fleeting, private satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, about showing him that the sister he underestimated had outgrown the boundaries he tried to impose. I paused, letting the truth echo in the silence of the room. "I can help you," I added finally, voice steady, "but not on the terms you expect. That chapter ended years ago." The air between us was heavy, charged with tension, disbelief, and the quiet reverence of someone finally meeting the real version of a person they once thought they knew. And in that charged silence, I knew the power had shifted. For the first time, I was fully in control. The room was still, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, leaving only the weight of what had just been revealed. Ethan sat across from me, his hands clenched, his pride bruised. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes, what he could get, how he could twist this. But I had anticipated that. "I'm willing to help," I said, letting the words float deliberately in the room. "But this time, the rules are mine." He swallowed, and I watched him closely, noting every flicker of resistance and fear. I took a sip of my coffee and continued, calm but unwavering. "First, no more excuses. If you're going to receive support, you have to meet me halfway. That means accountability, not entitlement." Ethan opened his mouth, likely to protest, but I raised a finger. "Wait. There's more. You need to stop expecting me to bail you out. Stop using guilt as leverage. You need to build your own life, just as I did." I could see the old habit of defiant struggle against this new reality. "You'll have access to resources, guidance, maybe a loan for something productive, but only if you commit to growth. No more relying on me for every little thing." Then I addressed his family. "I'm not just helping you. I want your children to see what it means to work for something, to earn, to respect boundaries. I'll provide opportunities, but they have to be met with effort. No entitlement. No shortcuts." I watched the shock on Ethan's face slowly give way to a grudging respect. It wasn't that he wanted to obey my rules, it was that he couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The sister he had underestimated was no longer the same person who hesitated to set boundaries. She was deliberate, powerful, and unwilling to compromise her integrity for anyone. And I wasn't done. "You also need to recognize what's been broken," I said. "The relationships we've had, they need repair. You need to take responsibility, apologize sincerely, and commit to being present in ways you haven't before. Real change isn't just about money, it's about character." I paused and let my eyes meet his, steady and unwavering. "If you can do that, if you can prove you're serious, then I'll support you. But until then, you wait. You reflect. You grow." It was a lot for him to take in. I saw the conflict behind his gaze, the mix of frustration, shame, and reluctant admiration. And I knew that the power had shifted permanently. No longer was I the sister being asked to sacrifice everything for someone else's comfort. No longer would my generosity be taken for granted. I leaned back slightly, feeling the weight of control settle into my shoulders. I could be compassionate, but I would not compromise my boundaries. I could offer guidance, support, and even opportunity, but only on my terms. For the first time in years, I was not just surviving, I was leading. And in that quiet, deliberate moment, I understood that real power didn't come from wealth alone. It came from the courage to stand firm, to protect your dignity, and to insist that others rise to meet you, rather than drag you down. Weeks passed, and the change in Ethan, and, slowly, in his family, was subtle but undeniable. I watched from my condo as he began taking responsibility for his actions. The excuses disappeared, replaced with effort and thoughtfulness. His children, once used to entitlement, now asked for guidance rather than handouts, curious about my work and my choices, eager to learn the lessons I had fought so hard to earn. I sat at my kitchen counter one evening, my grandmother's locket resting against my collarbone, the glow of the city lights spilling across the room. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, the nights of fear and doubt, the tears shed alone in a tiny apartment, the moments when I questioned if I had the strength to stand firm. And yet, every sacrifice, every small victory, had built not just wealth, but a life of dignity, purpose, and clarity. Ethan had come to me humbled, ready to acknowledge the woman I had become. He apologized, not just with words, but through consistent action, and slowly, the old wounds began to knit themselves back together. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that honesty mattered far more than any financial support I could have given him without conditions. I touched the locket again, feeling its smooth gold under my fingers, remembering my grandmother's words, "Your generosity is a gift, Sarah, not a chain." The lesson I had carried with me all these years had finally manifested in every corner of my life. I had given, but I had also protected myself. I had loved, but I had never lost sight of my own worth. Standing by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker against the night sky, I realized that I had everything I had ever needed, not just financial security, but power, respect, and, most importantly, peace. The girl who had once been bound by guilt and obligation had transformed into a woman who set the rules of her own life. And in that quiet moment, I whispered to myself, a statement as much for me as it was for anyone who might doubt my journey. I give freely, but only to those who rise with me. My life, my rules, my power, this is mine, and it always will be. Bottom of form.